So today I have a very special guest, extra special. I mean, they're all special. This is extra special. Today we have Dr. Paul Howard Nielsen on the podcast. Yes, folks, this is my dad, better known as Howie. And I'm so excited to have you here today. Thanks, Dad, for being here.
Hello, everybody. You're welcome, Liana. I have no idea why you want me here, but here I am.
um, so I mean, it's funny. I mean, this will age me a little bit, but whatever. Do you remember those Dos Equis commercials I think it was Dos Equis with the most interesting man in the world? But
No.
basically, I mean, of course you don't, but I think it was Dos Equis. There would be this guy and he looked a little bit like you, and he was always doing these amazing things, and everyone would joke that like that was you because you guys looked alike and you're literally the most interesting man in the world. So that's why I wanted to have you on, obviously. But as as I was turning 40 recently, you really look at your life. I made a big international move. I'm kind of starting all over. And you really look at the choices you're making. And I've had so many people throughout my life, whether it was like pursuing acting or especially doing this, that told me how brave I was. And I never really felt that brave. Like I didn't, it's like, oh, whatever, I don't know. And when I think about the choices that I've made over time, I realized that so many of them were modeled to me from you. Like I was, raised with this beautiful example. So guys, my dad was a dentist growing up, had his own dental practice, but his biggest passion in life was ornithology or bird watching. And fun fact, you helped discover a new bird to the planet, what, like 10 years ago?
That's right, in Southeast Asia.
In Cambodia, right? A tailor bird?
Yes, it was the Cambodian tailor bird.
And the best part is that this is a very nondescript little brown bird, right?
Yeah, a little bit of green on it. But yeah, it's a small little insect-eating bird in the bush.
And I mean, in this day and age when species are dying, that's, pretty impressive, I think. But as I look at my life and I take inventory of it and I think when you turn like a milestone age, especially as a woman turning 40, especially single and no children and, moving all over, you start to think about like, ooh, am I doing things right? Or am I doing things that everyone else is doing? And I'm not. And there was some feelings around that, obviously, but also, there was this real pride I felt that I was able to just go and kind of blaze my own trail. And I didn't really. Like, what I'm really realizing is like, I'm just making a very Nielsen choice because my whole life we've been traveling. You guys were expats in Cambodia for about 10 years. And I really wanted to talk about, because I think it's amazing that, most of us end up doing something similar to our parents, right? Maybe it's slightly different, but the way we grew up, we look at our peers, we look at, our community, we look at our parents, and we end up kind of similar. You did not do that. And I was raised somewhat outside of American culture, I feel like, especially looking back, the choices you made, which I'm so grateful for. Sometimes as a child felt challenging or weird, but you really blazed your own trail. And I'd love to hear a little bit about like where your bravery came from, because all of mine came from, you and mom, essentially. So do you want to tell us a little bit about like where you're from, your upbringing, just a little bit of backstory?
Okay, well, I grew up in the west side of Chicago in the town of Cicero. My parents moved after World War II. They were kind of forced off the family farm and ended up in Chicago looking for work. And it was an interesting situation because they were very uncomfortable moving to Chicago. The biggest city scared the farm kids. And I was the eldest of three children. And my mother and father really were ultra protective. They were worried about all the outside influences, such as the Catholic Italians and the garlic eating people that lived in our town. And, I had a childhood that had a lot of love and support, but it was quite constrained. I felt like I had, a leash on me. pretty much. And my mother was good at keeping me locked down. And I did all the things that she expected me to do. To the Boy Scouts, I did music lessons. I tried to be reasonable in school, although I was always bored. She put me into college. She wanted me to be an engineer because I was good in math, supposedly. So she actually applied to 4 engineering schools. And when I got into all 4, she chose the cheapest one, which was the state school, the University of Illinois.
Wait, what happened to me? Both you and Mom are good at math, and I'm like, numbers? What? What is that?
Well, I feel like I've lost that skill at this point through lack of use. But, within weeks, I realized that I had no interest, no enthusiasm for this project. And I went to the counselor at the university, and he said, well, what are you interested in? Nothing. I don't know why I'm here. And he had me thinking about my high school experience. And I ended up talking about my biology professor, or the high school biology teacher I had, that I was enthused about that class. So he ended up putting me in a number of biology classes. And I was able to kind of work my way through that. The problem was when I got to graduating, what to do, I got drafted. And I found out to the draft was I couldn't go to graduate school. My draft board wouldn't let me do that. But I could go to medical school, dental school. I opted to go to dental school with a couple of my friends. And that gave me 4 years of deferment. And by the time I got out of dental school, the draft was over. But, I still didn't have any interest in, what I've been doing. So I traveled for about a year, got as far as...
And you were always into like maps, I remember, like Grandma was saying, and you were like when you were growing up, like, like maps and...
My childhood bedroom, there are 3 walls and a window on the 4th wall. The 3 walls had a map of the U.S., a map of the world, a map of the solar system. And I used to spend, my boredom times just perusing, especially places like Southeast Asia, the Sulu and Banda Seas. They were just so fascinating for me as a child. And, we didn't have a lot of opportunity to travel. And so I guess I did it in my imagination. And, by the time I finally did get out of the Midwest, I realized that I couldn't stay there, that I needed to get out and explore the world more, that I had been, kind of walled in, from a very protective parenting and, limited resources when I grew up. So we didn't have the opportunity to fly around anywhere. So then,
so you kind of dove deep into, you went to like Nicaragua? Is that where you initially jumped ship?
Well, my first wife, Barbara, and I, we were in San Francisco, and we saw this little ad in the alternative press for a month-long camping trip that started in San Francisco and ended up in Panama. And we could afford doing that at the time. We thought, wow, this sounds great. And, once I realized there was a bigger world out there, I just wanted more and more and more of it. So I tried getting into the Peace Corps, and we were refused. And I think the problem there, my wife had an arrest record from civil rights demonstrations, and the Peace Corps didn't want political people involved. So I ended up, a year after graduating, I ended up in a mission hospital in the Mosquito Indian villages of northeastern Nicaragua. And I only did that. I volunteered for about 3 months. And I realized that dentistry was something that would be useful, and I could travel anywhere in the world with it. So that kind of got me out of the box. And then I came back to the States, and nobody quite understood why I was so excited about this. They didn't understand. They didn't know what kind of questions to ask. And I felt like I had this amazing breakthrough experience,
Hmm.
having been sequestered in Chicago for the bulk of my life. Um, that I just, thought this is the way to go. I wasn't a good student, but I thought travel was probably the best education I could imagine.
Hmm. Hmm. And you definitely, I mean, that was my childhood, right? Like that was something you guys really impressed upon me. And I remember, not that I went to a very good elementary school in like the middle of a cow field in Maine, but you guys were like, no, fuck school. Let's go to Africa. Let's go to St. Lucia. And I did, I was always fine enough in school. Yeah, I got good grades, but whatever. But it was very much, so much of my upbringing was an education in the world. And I do understand what you mean because, like, where I grew up was this very, blue collar farm town in Maine, mid coast Maine, that was like beautiful and full of lovely people. But from a very early age, we were going to all kinds of weird places. And all of my peers were, you know what I mean? It was like, I always felt a little different because from the beginning, my worldview is a lot bigger, which I appreciated. And it definitely, I guess made me feel other a little bit, which I think is hard as a kid. And also being in a very white state and being part Filipino and people, I remember in high school one time, some guy was like, what are you, part jalapeno? And I was like, Jesus Christ. Um, but yeah, I mean, that was such a big part of growing up for me was, going on adventures with you guys or having you guys go on adventures, which, looking back, it's the only thing but so much, I have so much gratitude for that, even when it was challenging.
Well, what's interesting for me is that I have virtually no regrets about my life at this point. But if I do have one, it's that we didn't actually live overseas while you were a young child and give
Hmm.
you more of an international exposure than, just the month or so that we would travel periodically. Um,
Yeah.
I think it would have been really, really quite interesting, as a family to have lived
Hmm. Yeah.
internationally.
Well, I'm a little, I agree, but I'm a little maybe relieved because it wouldn't have been like Paris. It would have been like Uganda. I would have been like,
Tanzania,
what the fuck?
yeah,
Because
probably.
yeah, when we took that trip to Africa in the middle of fifth grade, like that was, you were thinking about like really relocating us to Africa, right?
Well, there was a hospital in northern Tanzania that I could have worked at. And it was so interesting that when I suggested we do that, you just had a meltdown. I
Yeah,
don't want to
I
live. I
did
don't want to
not
live in
want to move to
Africa, Dad.
Africa. I did not. I remember I didn't even want to go on that trip. I don't like, and it's so interesting I was like 10 or 11 years old. And I remember viscerally being like, absolutely not. Like, I'm terrified. No, 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 no. And that was a very interesting, but that was a hard trip on me for sure. Like, I definitely am a bit more of a delicate flower than you and mom are. And I just remember, but again, that it was camping. It was, do you
That was a
actually,
pretty edgy trip.
should we talk about that trip a little bit?
Now we can skip that part.
No, so when I was in fifth grade, they pulled me out of school for like almost 2 months, and we traveled to on a bird watching camping
Yeah,
trip. Was it
yeah, it was
mostly bird watching? Yeah,
essentially a
yeah,
camping trip.
a camping trip that was sort of bird watching oriented. And most people, and what you guys were what in your 40s?
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, yeah,
And,
probably
and
mid
then
40s.
everyone, yeah, so that was probably the youngest range, right? And everyone else was like upwards, maybe 50s, 60s, some retired people there. And I'm like fucking 10 or 11 years old. And we're camping, and it's just like the tour falls apart. The guy gets malaria. Everyone's getting sick. I mean, I don't know.
Tracy
Should we
had a
tell?
Tracy had to drive the bus because one of the clients got the driver drunk, so we had to put him
Yeah.
off.
Oh my God, we're on this
Mutiny.
big bus on like windy mountain roads that are tight in Africa, and the driver is drunk, and our neighbor has to like commandeer the bus to drive it. I mean, I feel like it's probably, I'm gonna embarrass you because we have to tell the hippo story, I think. We're here.
Oh, great, great.
I mean, this podcast is having a twinge of like a comedy angle, so might as well, right? So I don't know who it'll be better from, me or you. Do you want to start it off? I'll like ad
Well,
lib it a little
you
bit.
know, you have to understand when you get in the tropics, the tendency is to get dehydrated. It's hot.
Yes.
Okay. And we were sitting around on the shores of Lake Victoria waiting for some people to show up and then for some luggage to show up. And this went on for about 5 days. And the whole time, we're eating and being lethargic and dehydrated. And the problem got to be constipation. So I found relief on the 6th day. I think it was about day 6 when we finally get all the people assembled and get in the bus and head out to, I think it was, what was it? Queen Elizabeth National Park, which has a different name now. And we end up camping there. And
by then the guide has malaria. And he's this like 70-something-year-old guide. So he is incapacitated. He's not telling us anywhere like where to put your tent. We're not getting any sort of direction.
And, I wanted to be away from the crowd. So I said, let's go down by the lake and put it right near the water and get away from everybody. And so we did that. The problem is the lake was filled with hippopotami. And during the night, they come out of the water, they feel safer, they come out and feed. We were warned that maybe the most dangerous animal in Africa is a hippopotamus on land. And all of a sudden, we're in the tent and the ground is moving. It's spongy, wet ground on the lakeside edge. And I'm in the tent with Karen and Liana. And one of the things they told us that we needed, part of our kit for the trip, was to bring a wide-mouthed jar. So you don't leave the tent at night. If you have to use the facilities, you use the jar.
Because there's wild animals, right? And it's not safe at night.
Right. So all of a sudden, my issue with constipation.
Well, we don't even, so wait. So they don't tell us where to put our tents. So half the people go near the water and the other people go on this hill and do not know that it's like an ant hill. They're like camping on top of ants.
Right.
So in the middle of the night, there are all these people who are having like thousands of ants getting into their tent, crawling all over them and biting them. And with hippos, you're not supposed to scare them, right? Because they stampede. So they're like, the two things you're not supposed to do is it's like lights and loud noises. Right. So here, all of these people are like getting bitten by ants in the middle of the night, turning on flashlights, yelling and screaming because of this ant situation. And all of a sudden, these hippos that are outside of our tent start getting agitated, right?
Yeah, I mean, the hippo is basically just, meters from our tent, to the point where you can feel the weight of the hippo steps shaking the ground. And
so here I am, 11, and people are yelling and screaming outside. There are huge animals moving the ground outside. I'm fucking terrified. I'm in a ball in the bottom of my suitcase, sleeping bag, whatever it was. I wish it was a suitcase. So scared, like already so scared, hot, just being like, where am I? This is so scary. And then things get worse.
Well, I might as well have been 11 as well, because this scared the shit out of me, literally. So here I am in this tent in the dark, trying to balance on, a little quart jar, and, 5 days of African eating is trying to move its way. And, I'm trying to not make any noise. Liana is kind of stuck between a hippopotamus on one side and her dad sitting on a jar.
Shitting in a jar. I just remember being like, this is the worst moment of my short life. Like, I am so scared. And this is like, I'm like, as a kid too, it's like, ew, poop, ew, your dad, everything's humiliating. I'm camping. Everything about this is so awful. And that is like one of my most formative memories from childhood.
Blame it all on the hippopotamus.
And then, I mean, of course, everyone was fine. No one got hurt. People went and slept on the bus. The ant people did. But it was so funny because you being you, which you love to tell stories, you're very entertaining, you're very funny. You would, for months after we got back, you were telling this at dinner parties, and I just remember being like so embarrassed, so ashamed, like re-traumatized. But I mean, these are, childhood moments, folks, right? You had those too. Right, relatable, right? Super relatable. But no, I remember that trip being really, I mean, that is one of my really intense memories. And I remember there were two other things that were traumatic and eye opening. But I remember once when we were hiking up to see the silverback gorillas, we had to, it was like 15 or 20 miles or something, right?
No.
No, like that led up to the park.
Okay.
Remember we like hiked all day? And I just remember going through some small village and getting swarmed by children who had never seen like a white kid before. And you guys had to like barricade me and I remember being so scared. They were just super curious and they're like pulling at my skin and pulling pieces of my hair out and like
they're
wanting
very
to
excited.
touch me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I was so overwhelmed and like terrified. And then, they're village kids, so they're not like super clean, obviously they live outside. So it was like the prissy seen as his mom. I spent a lot of time in the summers with my grandmother who was like, wearing dresses and washing my hands all the time and being very like prissy. Like this little girl is like, oh my God, what is happening to me? And then, I mean, man, the other thing was after we got there, and like I'll let you tell this story a little bit. When we got into the park, right? And they were like, no, she can't go. She can't go see the girls. She's too little.
Right. The head ranger would only speak French, and I virtually speak no French. And I kept trying to convince him that, Liana, we've come all this way from America, and we've hiked all this way to get up to the park. And, we need to let Liana have this experience. And, when the morning came, he just said no and no. And apparently there were 3 habituated groups on the mountain. And he'd pick out a half dozen people from the campground and send them off with guides. And off they'd go. And when they got down to picking for the 3rd group, he looked at me and he said, okay, you can take the baby. And so
did you bribe him? Did you give him money?
No, I said I would, give money for conservation, which, was basically trying to, bribe the guy. And he refused to do that, to his credit. But he gave us the troop that was, less than an hour hike away from our camp, which I thought was great because other people had much longer treks.
Well, I remember even that being kind of intense because like you're hiking through, they had machetes and we're going through like the jungle where they're just having to hack our way through like greenery.
Right. One guy had a machete. The other guy had an AK-47.
There's a lot of big scary guns on that trip, I remember too. I'm like, why are we out in the wild with people who have these really huge guns?
And it was interesting. We, got to the point where we were close to the animals, and the guide sensed that he knew what to look for, or he could smell them. And he said, "Okay, here we are." And I couldn't see anything; it was just all vegetation. And he said, "Okay, follow me." And we went through a little curtain of vegetation, and here was a whole troop of maybe 15 mountain gorillas, and it was just incredible to walk into this, kind of family scene. And, Liana was at my side, and the gorillas are habituated to seeing human beings, but they are not habituated to seeing little human beings. And Liana was small for her age. And there was a female gorilla that saw Liana and was curious. and she came right up to us. I mean, just
Beelined.
nose to nose with Liana.
Literally in my face. A
And
huge female gorilla.
Liana's kind of crawling up on my leg and, grabbing
so
me
scared.
as tightly as possible. And I had no idea what to expect here. Is this gorilla going to take Liana away and adopt her? And I'm going to have to say goodbye to my daughter? And I thought about that. And I thought, well, that'd be all right. And, our guide was saying, just stay calm, stay calm.
And I was like literally melting inside. I'm like, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die.
That was strange. But, it seemed like, she maybe pondered you for, 5
Eternity?
seconds, 10 seconds, 30. I have no idea how long it lasted. And then I think it was like she recognized, it's just another one of those human beings. And she turned around and walked away. But it was like this absolutely magnificent moment of interaction with another species at point blank range and, not being in control of the situation. And, and we ended up spending an hour there watching, the young ones playing, just the whole gamut, watching, young couples mating, watching the big silverback, dominate over everything. It was an interesting trip because Liana got to see a wide range of animal behavior. Probably a lot of it around sex education.
Yes, I do remember a lot of that where you're like, whoa, okay.
The trip was essentially based around, natural history. There were a few of us bird people on it, but basically it was trying to get experiences with the animal life of East Africa, and we did.
Yeah. It felt like this gorilla sitting down was the same. I was like nose to nose. We're like the same height, it felt like. And it was like breath in my face. And I mean, as a child, and I obviously wasn't close, but there were a few moments in that trip where I was like, I'm going to die. I'm definitely going to die. Like, I'm not leaving Africa. I'm not going to. I remember one time you were like jokingly negotiating me as a bride to like some Maasai boy, and I was like hearing you being like, am I gonna be sold for goats? Like, what is this? But it was interesting because, as a really sensitive kid, like that was hard on me, and it was also amazing and all of the things. But I remember at the end of the trip, we had seen so much poverty and so many children in poverty. I remember mom was like, do you want to give all your clothes away? And I've always liked clothes, and I'm an only child, like, that's mine. And I just remember being like, yeah, I do. I want to let's leave all my clothes here. And, just remembering like literally just having this lesson of like, whoa, there are people who have so much less than I do and have it so much harder than I do. And I think, not that I wouldn't be probably soft and empathetic already, but I remember that was like a really interesting moment as a child to really witness and be like, yes, I do. Yes. But yeah, I mean, I definitely had a bit of different. And then you go back to 5th grade and I'm like, how do I sit at my desk? Like, what is this?
Right. You can't go back in the box again once you've done that.
No. I'm like, I'm going to be weird forever. Like, that is true. So, one of the things I didn't really have an appreciation for this until I wanted to become an actress. And even that, though, is so funny. Like, I grew up in a house that you always, like, there were lots of books and there was always lots of music and there was an appreciation for, like, arts and culture. And your sister, Judy, she was an actress. And I remember, I saw her, like, we did theater. We went to New York. Like, there was always art and culture in my life. So on one level, like, on some level, becoming an actress wasn't, like, so crazy, right? But on the other, it was like, well, that was not really, I grew up in Maine. Like, that was not something anyone was doing. And I just really had this like dying, like it was what I wanted more than anything in the world. And it was really hard to almost give myself permission and to wrap my head around this thing that wasn't like, oh, okay. Cause I, grew up being like, I think I want to go to Harvard and be a doctor. And, it's like, I want to have a career and all of these things. And like realizing that I deeply wanted to pursue a career in the arts was hard and scary to admit, to say. And then, a couple years into it, it was like, you gave me this example because so much of our lives, my life, your life, you were traveling to go bird watching. And I would love to hear you talk about A, how you got into it, and B, what that meant to you, or what those experiences, like, what was that drive? Why?
Yeah. You know, as a young boy, I was always kind of in the background. I was shy. Um, I never stood out. Athletically, I couldn't really perform because I was one of the smallest kids in the class. Um, I wasn't that good academically. I guess one of the things I liked to do was see if I could answer the teacher's question and simultaneously make my students laugh and kind of disrupt the class. I always felt like that was a win for me. But, it was like, how do I separate out? How do I wanted to make my mark somehow, being a little kid, the girls had no interest in me because they were bigger than I was, or it just seemed like I was slow to develop emotionally. Um, how do things separate out? And I think once I started traveling, I realized um, that was a good source of learning for me. It was a good education. And my interest in birds got triggered by a professor of mine, and it was a good fit for me. I was curious. The bird book she gave me, every bird had its own unique map, and I love maps, and it just fascinated me that, here in North America, you had 700-800 species of birds, and they all kind of have this unique thing about them. So the combination of my desire to travel and using my interest in birds to kind of help organize that travel got me to all four corners of the United States, so just all over the states. And the early opportunity to go in Central America, I realized that, the biodiversity in the tropics is much greater. So I wanted to see more of that. So whenever I could, it would be, how can I organize a trip to South America or to Mexico? And it was really this combination of my love for the adventure of travel, plus this kind of academic pursuit of, using my biological training and my academic interest, I guess, could be fulfilled somewhat by pursuing the birds. And I've just found over the years, to see a number of things, you have to go to the end of the gravel road and hike up some mountain in Cameroon and Central Africa, or you end up with these just incredible experiences, meeting the world and seeing the world. And if I'm addicted to anything, I'd say I'm addicted to that.
Mm-hmm. How many species of birds are there on the planet?
It's upwards of around 11,000.
How many have you seen?
Well, I'm hoping this winter I'll hit 7,000.
Dad,
So,
dust that shoulder off.
well, no, it just means I've traveled a lot. I've been to 65 countries or so, and a number of them multiple times. And anytime I go, I'm always kind of spending time in the bush, in the forest, in the swamp.
Yeah. One of my favorite things about you, and I feel like I absorbed it, and grandma was this way too, but witnessing you and us being in all kinds of situations. I remember, like, on New Year's Eve, we were like in Bali one year, invited to someone's house, like, randomly, and we were with these like Balinese people eating like I don't even know how it happened, but like, I watched you, like, sort of tease and play with kids in like Africa or all over, and like your ability to connect with people of varying ages, cultures, races, socioeconomic like, you always approached everyone with this like open-hearted, smiley playfulness, where you would really like witness and invite them in, right, at their level, which I think is such an incredible like just an incredible way to look at life, right? And I think it was interesting. So, like you too, I had a first marriage, and I remember really thinking fundamentally about why some of the things didn't work. And though Mike is the most amazing and his family is so delightful, he was really raised from a little bit more of a normal cultural fear-based place of no, right? Be careful, other people aren't doing that. And one of the most beautiful things I got from you and my childhood was, come from yes. Try anything once. People are ultimately good. Things will ultimately work out. And it was so interesting because fundamentally Mike would sort of be like, no, no, no. And I would always be like, yes, yes, yes. And not that that can't work out, but I really, remember kind of zooming out and being like, wow, I feel so lucky. And I think that goes back to like being, more fearless. And at this stage in my career with what I'm doing with my business, so much of what I do is get people really connected to like what they feel strongly and passionately about, and being brave enough to trust that.
Yeah,
And
trusting is
you
a
guys,
big thing.
yeah, you guys really set that up for me in a way that was really special. And it was interesting because, yeah, I mean, bird watching is sort of like, it's not like you're making money. I mean, you've guided people, like you have made money doing it, like post retiring and selling your business as a dentist. But mostly this was something you did for the love of it. And I remember being like, well, I guess I'm allowed to be an artist because this is what I love and want to be passionate about. And that, you profoundly gave me permission to do something that a lot of people thought was like silly or unrealistic. And I always felt really grateful for that.
Well, that was unintentional, I think. I mean, it's just sort of,
Yeah.
who we are. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, you, you didn't have to be serious in engaging people if you could find some way to just make them laugh, or, you
Hmm.
know, to create a little diversion. And I found I could disarm uncomfortable situations, by just trying to be friendly and funny with someone. And,
Yeah.
certainly with children, they react to that immediately.
Which
But
made you also a really great dentist, right? Because
yeah,
people aren't
I
as
had fun
afraid.
with
And
my patients. We enjoyed
yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was interesting. You said something a couple of years ago. Oh, this might make me emotional because I remember seeing you that way. But you're like, I wasn't very present for your childhood, was I? And I was like, honest. And I was like, no, you weren't. You're like, I don't really remember playing with you very much. And you didn't. And I don't, at the time, like, I think, I don't know, mom had, like, I was like, both of you, I'm like, what do you want? I don't want to do anything you guys are doing. Like, let me stay inside and play Barbies and not be dirty. And like, I don't want to go outside. There's bugs. It's scary out there. And you guys are always like pushing me to get in the mix, which is great. But I feel like, it's interesting. I think people have a hard think that being an only child is like bad. And a lot of my friends who have like one kid, they're like, well, I want to give them a sibling, or like I don't want them to have to be an only child because it's so bad. And it was interesting because obviously it's the only thing I've ever known. So I like it. And there are moments where, there were like, I was often the only child. Like I remember like some dive trip to Bonaire when I was, whatever, 8, 12, who knows, somewhere in there. And you guys are all, I'm like sitting on the bar and you're teaching me to use 3 fingers to make gin and tonic so I can like feel included. My early bartending career, which was like, I thought was delightful. I was having like the best time. But, people think, oh, it's so bad. But I think it was really special because not only did we have all these like crazy travel experiences, but like you guys, because of your childhood, right, where you felt like your mom was such a helicopter parent, like I had probably more freedom than I was comfortable with. Um,
Right.
but you also treated me like I was my own person. So it was almost like the
Interesting.
three of us were these people together, and you guys were not just my parents, but my friends. And I think sometimes maybe I wish you were more parental, looking back on like needing maybe more boundaries or whatever it is. But like I could see very much where, your parenting style was a reaction to what you received. But it was interesting because um, I ended up living with you guys during the pandemic. And that was the most time we'd spent together since I moved out at 18 and went to college. And I remember like going into therapy in my 20s and feeling really like, really uncovering all the stuff from my childhood that made me feel like, ooh, this hurt me and that hurt me. And they made these choices that were outside of me or what, you know what I mean? Like all of those things that that little kid inside of you. I mean, no matter what type of parent you are, your kid has this, right? Like you see that, right? And you understand that your parents are doing the best they can, no matter, you know, with the tools they had given and often much better than their experience. And what I found was like profoundly beautiful was because I was, you know, it was the pandemic. We're all a little nervous. I had just gotten divorced. We were living together for the first time, and I was really healing from something quite major. And it ended up being, I feel like, this happy accident where, like, I almost felt like I got to be reparented a little bit by both you and mom in a way that maybe in my childhood I had yearned for and didn't get. And coming out of that experience, I really feel again, grateful is the only word that comes to mind. Like just profoundly grateful that I feel so much closer to you both now. And it was funny, I would joke around about this. I'm like, oh, they're my best friends. Like you guys are like the people I spend the most time with. But I really feel like not only did we get to have this full circle moment, I remember where like I like and you know, you only had one car at the time because you guys weren't living in the US that much and we were like kind of squabbling over who got to use it and I had not had a great day and this is me at like 37 bursting into tears and like running into the bedroom and like you followed me and knocked on the door and just like gave me a big hug and were there for me in a way that like I think I needed more of as a kid. And it was like this profoundly healing moment where it was just sort of like full circle. And I feel like I had those moments with mom too. And like it's just so interesting how life presents opportunities like that for you sometimes, right? And I think the relationship with your parents can be so complicated. And I just think that I hit the jackpot. Like I got so incredibly lucky. And the other thing that people always talk about, like all my friends and everyone growing up, and like to this day, like you guys gave such a beautiful example of what partnership is still. Like I don't know a lot of people whose relationships I would like to emulate. And that was another thing too, where like towards the end of my marriage, I was like, I feel like my parents have a better time, like have a better marriage than I do. And I'm like, that felt like, oh, I did it wrong, right? Like I think I want a little bit of more of what they're having. And it was funny because I remember Emily, right, from growing up when we were both back from the pandemic. I was telling her this, and she goes, "Liana, don't be ridiculous. Like no one can have that relationship. Like that's so like unheard of." But I think you did such a beautiful job. You guys both did such a beautiful job. Do you have any? Because at this point, you've been married how long?
42
42?
years.
Just, oh yeah, 42 yesterday.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. Can you give us some advice on what it's like? Because this is your second marriage. Can you give us advice on, you know, what to do? Because you guys are best friends, you're partners, you travel together, you have fun together, you seem to deeply enjoy each other's company still. What's the secret?
I don't know. I mean, for me, it's like, what do you want when you grow up? And if I think about it, it's like, I want to be in love. I can't think
Mm-hmm.
of anything better than, just having this lifelong love affair. Um, what else do I want to do with my life? That just seems to supersede anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, in proposing to Karen and offering a life with her, it was like, I'm yours, baby. Let's just go do it together, and not really impose that much of my agenda. Although I seem to take her bird watching everywhere, so I'm not sure I'm not imposing my agenda. But
Well, she's
um,
pretty game. She's pretty game.
yeah, and I'm just amazingly fortunate to have a partner who's um, open to exploring, and she's not. Neither one of us are pushing our agendas that hard. We just want to be together and do things, and it's
Yeah.
worked nicely for 42 years.
Yeah, I heard once they were talking about one of the best things for relationships is continuing to have new experiences together. And I think just because of what you're interested in, you and mom have continued to have that, and that allows you to grow in the right direction. And when I think about, because I'm at a point in my life where I really only recently realized how much I've been in lots of lovely relationships, but I was always prioritizing work first. And this is the first time I really feel like, oh wow, I would like to like shift my focus a little bit more into relationship. And I think a lot about what I want, and it is always like what you and mom have, like your best friends, like you know, you seem very in love still. You're very, you know, I didn't witness fighting really, besides like slight, you know, bickering a little bit, but like I can count like on one hand maybe. Like there just was this ease to your relationship that I feel very grateful to have witnessed and continue to witness.
Hmm. I think back when when I met Karen, I was swept off my feet, and I wanted to marry her within a few months of dating her. Um, Prior to that, I was quitting my clinical job in Chicago, and I was going to go to India to kind of pursue studies in yoga. And I met Karen, and that put a screeching halt to that plan. But I told her that I would like to take her traveling around the world, and she didn't want to go right away. We stayed in Chicago for a year, but then after we got married, we did go traveling. We traveled for a year and a half, 2 years, doing some volunteer work together. But the point being, we stepped out of our lives and created a new shared experience together that, neither one of us had the upper hand. It was new to
Right.
both of us.
Right.
And I think that kind of created a way of living as a couple where, okay, let's try this. Let's explore this avenue. And we've been game, for 42 years. It's like, yeah, that sounds fun. Let's try it. And again, I'm so fortunate. She's just so open and willing and adventurous.
Capable. She's like, she could do anything. She
Yeah,
also is like the most, I mean, literally, that woman can do it. She's the most confident woman ever. She's never had anxiety a day in her life, and like she can figure anything out. Oh my god.
I'm the neuro-
Before we move on, wait, say that again.
I'm the neurotic one in the couple.
I mean, thank you. I inherited that. Before we move on, let's take a two because I have to pee so bad. I've been drinking too many liquids. So take a two, and we'll be right back, Claire. Sorry, I never do this, but I was like, I'm now just focusing on how bad I have to pee. So hold on.
Oh, then.
Okay, so I want to pivot a little bit. In your recollection, when you were present, what kind of kid was I?
You were pretty headstrong. You wanted to do things, and you were pretty insistent that you get to do them your way. And, most of the time, I guess we allowed that to happen. But, if we wanted to get in the car and go somewhere and, you were making a fuss, I just used my overwhelming size and authority to drag you along. I'm not sure I was always that good about negotiating. It's like, sorry, Liana, you're out of here. But yeah, you just had energy as a child. You would create. You would have ideas and just take off on your own. Um, Creating imaginary scenarios. It was fun to watch. You'd be the star of your own fairy tales. But
Still am.
It's because we were out in the woods and there was nobody close. You were interested in, being delivered to, distant neighbors that had kids that you could play with. And then when you were old enough to, get away from home, you'd be staying at your grandma's, and then you ended up with a car, and you were not to be seen by the time you turned 15, 16 years old. So you kind of
social butterfly.
You moved on pretty rapidly. But
Yeah, I guess I did a lot of my own things. Like I have such a recollection of being so shy and so anxious and afraid of things. But it's funny. That probably wasn't your opinion.
well, and did mom get you doing gymnastics and dancing and singing
Yeah.
lessons? And I
Singing
know
was my
mom.
idea. The singing was my thing. But yeah, all the dancing and the sports. And I would have been happy just like melting crayons on that. I mean, this is one of my favorite things always is like, I had such an 80s childhood where I remember mom brought home a hot plate
A
from
griddle.
a like yard sale, like a griddle that you plugged in, it would heat up. And she was like, "Here, this is for you." And you put paper on it, and you melt crayons. So at like 5 or 6, I'm like playing with a hot like plate in my room alone, melting crayons. But like I would have been happy doing that forever. And mom was good about getting me like outside, and like I just would have probably been okay playing painting and coloring and playing Barbies in my room for like eternity.
Yeah, I probably would have let you do that. I don't know.
Mom was like, "Get outside." So, were you surprised when I was like, "I'm going to be an actress"?
um, yeah, but that's no. I don't think I was. I could see you wanting to pursue a bigger dream and needing to be uh, needing to be seen. Perhaps growing
Hmm.
up in the woods, you weren't seen. You were,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know, and perhaps the fact that I wasn't around as much, you weren't seen by me. But
that's also true.
the need to engage with the world, um, with you being, with you being the focus. You wanted to.
Was there something that you thought I might end up being? Like when you guys saw me as a kid, you're like, "She might be this when she grew up," or like, "No idea."
Hmm. An argumentative lawyer, perhaps.
I did have the phase where I thought in college, I thought I was going to go to law school. So
Yeah, you were always
so I guess
quite
I was
verbal.
arguing. I still am.
And yeah, we'd hear about things from you. If it wasn't what you wanted, you gave us a piece of your mind. Um, so, so yeah, seeing you as a lawyer or a politician would not have been all that surprising, I suppose.
So then and like, what was your thoughts, feelings, anything about around my acting career, that part of my life?
Oh, you know,
Reactions?
um, knowing how difficult that is, uh, I thought there's going to be a lot of disappointment, a lot of heartbreak,
Hmm.
financial insecurity.
Hmm.
Just wondering how this is going to end up. I mean, it's an exciting thing to pursue, and it's like once you start down that road, there's really no telling, what
Hmm.
opportunities might avail themselves, what might happen.
Hmm.
And it seemed really exciting, and I thought it was good. But both Karen and I did worry that you were going to struggle.
Hmm.
And
And I did.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think that's probably true of most people that you
Yeah.
know deal work in the arts. That
Yeah. It was interesting when I decided to let go of it a few years ago because I really had to untangle the idea of being a failure. And I remember I was working with Ching at the time, my trauma healer, and he was like, "Okay, like go into what your career would have looked like." And it was so funny because I was like, "Oh, if I kept going, like I had some cool things happen. I got jobs, I worked, I had some exciting TV and film things go on and commercials, and oh, I was just a working actor that probably would have continued to work and work more often if I had done it and liked it. And it was a really interesting thing to untangle my identity from.
mm-hmm.
What was your impression, if any, of me sort of pivoting into my business and like becoming a health coach?
Well, the thing that was nice there is you were struggling with your own health issues pretty
Yeah,
severely there for a while, and the
yeah.
fact that you were focusing on that, to me, that was the first step toward healing. And
Hmm.
I thought, yeah, this makes total sense, and I think it's it's probably more pragmatic than being an actor. So, I mean, from that point of view, I thought, yeah, she can probably find, you know, ways of making her way through the world more easily doing that. But it seems like you're working both sides of the street here. You're able to create a bit of performance for yourself in delivering your messages, and
That's true.
you seem to be enjoying the human interaction. As I did, being a dentist, that was the one thing that I really loved about it, is playing with my patients.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I
you know,
think we both really share a love of people, like a fascination, a love, an ability to connect to people.
yeah,
Like I feel,
it's a joy to be able to engage with another human being. Uh,
yeah. It was interesting because I was holding on so tightly to the idea of being an actor, and that was my identity. And I remember when I started working with Kathleen at the Human Bean Store, she was like, just you are clinging to this idea and you're only allowing yourself this tiny bit of happiness, right? Like, I can only be happy if I have this one idea of what my career looks like. And like, you're causing yourself suffering. And I never looked at it that way. And she was like, can you zoom out and look at like, what do you love about acting? And it was like, I love connection. I love making people laugh and feel good. I love storytelling. I love, collaboration. And it was funny because she's like, okay, are there other areas of your life where you're doing this? And I was like, perfectly describing my health coaching career, right? Like, there is storytelling elements. You are helping people. There is collaboration. I try to have fun with it and make people laugh and not take it too seriously because,
but on
feeling
some
shitty
level,
is,
it's very real.
yeah.
Dealing with people's well-being, their health. It requires a huge amount of trust uh, and sincerity. And
Mhm.
I'm not so sure how you have that all the time when you're acting. Um,
No, well, I never felt like, I just remember not knowing, like, as a child, I felt like this deep need to figure out, like, to have this purpose. And I remember Christy, one of my cousins, was like, she knew she wanted to be a vet when she was little. And I remember always hearing about that and feeling like jealous. And I remember I was like thinking, I was studying journalism a bit at college, and I was like, maybe I want to be like a news reporter. And I like dabbled in that a little bit. And I was like, no, I think I want to be silly. And it was like, and part of me, I remember because mom was a model, like seeing those pictures, and I wanted to be like mom because mom was like the coolest. But I was too short. I remember I went to some casting in high school
right.
and they told me I was too short. And I was like, okay, I can't be a model, I guess. So then I guess I'll be an actress because you could be silly and I don't have to be that tall. And I just remember being like, I don't think this is exactly it either, but like, I really want to like do it. And I really found myself loving it. And then it was interesting when I sort of pivoted over, it was like, oh, because it always felt like, even, I'm like, not that like art is so important, especially things like theater, like it helps people, right? Like making people laugh and empathize and telling stories is incredibly important. But I would always feel like, I think like it felt selfish to me. And I always felt like there was something more I needed to do to give back, or I really yearned to do to give back. And so when I started health coaching on the side, it made me feel like I had this like full career. And then the relief it gave me to be able to prioritize this when I allowed myself to be honest and let go of the acting stuff felt like such a gift and like a second chance at like, showing up with all of these other tools. Because the interesting thing about a career, especially something like acting, is like you do a lot of healing because you are the commodity. So you have to be really good with yourself. And that was a lot of introspection and a lot of therapy and a lot of those things because you have to be able to be okay with your emotions and, to be okay being very raw or seen. And it's just a really interesting trajectory. Um, so you are having a big birthday this year. You
mm,
are
I
turning
turned
75.
yes.
Um, are there any sort of life lessons, words of wisdom, things that you would share or impart on all of us that you've taken from your incredible, incredible life? Like truly, Dad, incredible.
Well, well, that's a heavy ask. Um,
It doesn't have to, it can be little things. It doesn't have to be so serious. But yeah, like, anything that you've thought of, learned recently, or a way of looking at the world.
I for me it's always been get out and try new things. You know, and travel has been the way I've done that. But at the same time, this couple of years of COVID and the lockdown has been quite spectacular in terms of me uh, learning more about stillness and
Mm.
learning about um, just being where I am and appreciating that. Uh,
Hmm.
so I find myself telling people, yes, I am retired now. I don't feel like I need to be doing anything other just being with Karen, being in the forest, being with my birds, being in the garden. Um, I've kind of let go of my to-do list other than go travel. That's still something that will, kind of light a flame for me. Um, yeah, just don't be afraid to try things. Life is so short. It's incredible. I've gotten to 75 in a blink of an eye. And now
How old do you feel inside? How old do you feel inside?
you talk to me one day and I'll feel, like I'm 35, and other days I feel like I'm 90. One of the sad things that happens is, your body does start wearing down, and you can feel those things uh, become limitations. And,
Hmm.
I try to resist uh, having me limit what I can do because, oh, my back hurts or my knee hurts or, I'm too tired. I try to push through that, but, it is a real thing with aging. And uh, you know, one of the things I have learned is I can't drink whiskey like I used to. That's, I think the sooner you learn that lesson, it's a good one. Yeah, and I'm, spending more time on a wellness practice that, I've taken some of my dietary uh, clues from you, Liana. Thank you for that. I had my
You're
veggies
so
for
welcome.
breakfast as usual.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
but I've dusted off some of the yoga practice that I've had over the
Yeah,
years.
you were a yoga teacher.
Now, I taught yoga for a year in Chicago before I.
Iyengar?
No, it was Pantabi Joyce. So
Ah,
Ashtanga
okay.
yoga.
Oh, Ashtanga.
Yeah,
Okay.
his son Manju was my teacher, and Pantabi came to the West Coast a couple times, and I had the honor because I was the only one that had a van. I got to, be his chauffeur when he was stateside. Um, but yeah, that was an important part of my early development, being around people that valued spiritual growth, uh, physical wellness,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
I've tried to incorporate that off and on, during my life.
Yeah, I definitely got that was something that it was interesting with you guys. It was a lifestyle, right? You didn't push it. It was just our reality, like having organic veggies from the farm down the road. And you guys were always active and being in nature. Like that was just like all of the fun. It was so funny, like moving to New York and being like, ooh, organic is more expensive, or people are paying all this money to do yoga, like do all these things that I sort of naturally grew up around, thinking like, ooh, this is life, right? And I was like, oh, I like weirdly grew up like a little bougie, but not in all these like wellness ways that later and later became bigger and bigger. Actually, I would love to ask because I know, with we've been sort of looking at your health regimen this year and shifting some things. You started researching and microdosing on psilocybin. How's that been?
It's a work in progress right now. Um, I've
Why
actually,
did you want to do it, and what are some of the effects? Like, tell us a little bit about what you've learned when you researched it and your experience.
well, yeah, I've read Michael Pollan's book. What is it? How to Expand Your Mind, or I can't remember the
Yeah,
title
change
of
how
it.
to change your mind.
How to
Yeah,
Change
yeah,
Your
yeah.
Mind. And I dabbled with psychedelics back in the '70s, and had some pretty powerful experiences, but kind of left them behind, and didn't really pursue that for decades. And with the stuff coming in the press now, many people exploring medical uses, psychiatric, psychological uses of things like psilocybin and LSD, it made me very curious. And I read a book that was written about the Harvard Psych Department back in the 50s when Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert and Houston Smith and Andrew Weil, all these people were there, and there was a faction that kind of went off the deep end with the psychedelic drugs. But I got done with that book and realized that, that whole area of exploration was shut down for political reasons back in the 60s, and it was a dead end for a while. So with it resurfacing, I find myself curious. So we have a local source here, organic guy that's way into different mushrooms and foraging for edible plants, and he is into the microdosing and macrodosing for that matter.
Yeah, we did mushrooms together a couple of times during the pandemic.
Right.
I was like, guys, my parents are cool. They're my best friends. Sometimes we take mushrooms.
And it's really this curiosity. How can we, experience more? How can we expand our perception of the world? Because, we tend to limit ourselves. I'm prone to generalizations and, just simplifying things when actually I should be opening more and more. And I guess I see the potential for exploration there. So for the last couple of months, I've been, on the Stamets stack. Paul Stamets is a mycologist that recommends you mix psilocybin with lion's mane mushroom and vitamin B3, niacin. And I feel like I'm less irritable, that there's a sort of a sense of contentment that comes along with it. They suggest that you don't feel any kind of overt effect of the mushrooms, that it should be kind of subclinical in its effect. But I do that 4 days on and then 3 days off. And
in between, so it's like day on, day off, or 4 days in a row, 3 days.
4 days in a row, and then 3 days with nothing, and going back and forth. I now have two friends that are doing it. People are curious. I've had a lot of people just, what the hell are you doing, Howie? Why are you doing this? And
I mean, I get that from you guys too. I'm like, I'll try anything once. Like, let's push the envelope a little bit. Like, what's this?
Well, it depends.
I love that.
Who's promoting it? But in this case, there was enough stuff in the scientific literature, the medical literature, that it really makes me feel like there was very little risk to me, even as an old man at 75. It's like medically, I don't see it as a problem. So. It's an ongoing experiment, and, stay in touch. I'll let you know how it's going. But, the last 2 months,
it feels like more peace, right? So, what's the experience?
Yeah, I would say just a level of contentment and being in the moment that I'm less anxiety, perhaps.
Love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what's the goal? Like, what are some of the other things they say come from it?
Well, I'm not that goal oriented. It's really, let's go explore.
Right. Well, in the literature, what it's like. Well, then more creativity.
I've got a friend who's extremely creative person, but he's also extremely compulsive. He had a bad problem with alcohol. He's managed to curtail that, and hasn't had a drink in a couple of years. But he's using edibles and marijuana gummies and things like this incessantly, and he overeats. He's always eating.
Void.
That kind of compulsive behavior, it's suggested that, using psilocybin can reduce that sort of compulsive behavior. No, I don't know if you
Interesting.
have to continue taking. I don't know anything about it, so nobody pay any attention to what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Not
But
medical advice, just what
not
we're reading
medical
about.
advice, but I'd suggest that you look at the current literature and the stuff that's coming out in the media. It's
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot of
yeah,
interesting stuff about it, which is
yeah,
why I was curious
absolutely.
because I know you're always reading and interested, which I love.
Yeah, so it's just like, okay, a new way of traveling the world.
Yeah. All right. So I have two more quick questions for you as we wrap it up. One is, I guess, a two-parter. Um, do you have any advice for me where I am in life right now, or hopes for me? Either or. You can also say no. But yeah, advice for where I am right now, and
Well, I'm
the moment.
amazingly proud of what you're doing. I think you have bigger balls than I ever had. You're really brave. And
I don't know
the
about
fact that
that.
you're over there trying to establish yourself, in this dynamic milieu of Lisbon is fantastic. So I totally support and hope, that this works its way into, an exciting part of your life. Um,
Mm.
so I'm a big fan of what you're doing. And, I'm hoping that we can come visit at least once a year, or if not more.
Heck yeah.
And,
You better come back.
your next apartment better have 2 bedrooms.
I know, I know. I looked this time around, but I was like, I've been homeless for too long. I was like, I just gotta stay in somewhere. Well, thank you. That, I think you always hope for your parents to be proud of you, and I believe you.
Yeah,
So,
I
thank
think
you.
your mother is as well. No, no, the fact, what you're doing brings us a lot of joy, and that's lovely. It's a gift.
Oh, that feels like I'm doing my job as a kid then,
Yeah, you
right?
are. Yeah, good job, kid.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. And then, as per the name of the podcast, we always talk about ways we love through difficult situations. So, life is always giving us opportunities to suffer or to deal with challenging things. And, I always ask all of my guests, what is your advice when something hard happens? How do you love through it? Which is like, how do you change your mindset, change your, framework around it? How do you pick yourself back up when you fall down? Do you have any advice? What's one of your favorite things to do when you get disappointed or, there's a roadblock?
Well, for 22 years, I had a dental practice with a partner, and we disagreed about things a lot of the time. And we'd have these contentious arguments. And, sometimes I'd be driving into town, just with a knot in my stomach, realizing that I was going to have to do battle not only with tooth decay, but with my, with my partner. And I realized this was an opportunity to practice loving kindness. That
Mm.
my guru was actually my partner, who I was, you know, upset with, angry with, frustrated with, whatever. That I had to come to work and somehow find a way to do it. And the whole practice of loving kindness seemed to be the way to approach it. And it worked a lot of the time, but not always. Uh, but
And be more specific. It was that you trying to be more open-hearted and empathetic and like, how do I see this person as a teacher? And how do I take this opportunity to learn something? Like, what is that? What does that mean?
well, understanding that I was part of the problem as well, so I had to
Mm-hmm.
accept the fact that he was seeing things from his point of view, and I had to try to accept that and love him for what he was doing, while at the same time, trying to as gently and successfully put my values and my ideas across. Um, you know, I don't know how specific I can be with that, but
No, no,
I know
that's great.
it's like loving kindness as I'm driving into Augusta. Okay. I,
Right. Everyone deserves empathy. Everyone,
right.
how can we give,
Don't fly off the handle immediately.
right, right. How do we communicate from like a heart-centered place? And how do we
Right.
give people the benefit of the doubt? All of that. That's so beautiful. And you were very much an example of that. I saw that throughout my childhood how you approached and treated people with respect, and loving kindness is a perfect word for that. And I feel grateful to have had that example. Dad, thank you. I mean, I can't think of a better way to spend an hour or so. And honestly, you're one of the coolest guys I know, and you always have been. And I know it's so funny. You wax very poetic about how you have these friends that build big companies or whatever, and it's like, no, you've had a really impressive life. And I also, as your kid, look up to you and am proud of you and think that, like, truly, like, you have big shoes to fill for whoever wanders into my life next. Because, of course, you can compare everyone to your dad. And, you're handsome and interesting and funny and smart and so good to people and treat moms so well that, like, total package, man.
I don't know if I'd agree with that or mom would either.
Mom definitely wouldn't.
Thank you for those kind words. You're so sweet.
I love you so much, Dad. And I just really feel like I did win the lottery with who I ended up with my parents. Even I know I probably told you I hated you more than once as a teenager. I take it back. I take it all back.
I never took that seriously. Well, both
Good.
Karen and I feel like we won the lottery as well. We absolutely, we talk about you every day, and every day it's like, have you heard from Liana? What's Liana doing? You're halfway around the world, and it's like you're still right in the house.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Dad. Thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, for just being an awesome dad.
Well, cool. I'm glad we worked that out. Love you.